Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Marco's Pizza. And I got to tell you, I am very much of the same mind of many of the people that posted our forum at forum.dawgnation.com. I think it's just wishful thinking on the part of many in the media that South Carolina is going to keep it close with Georgia on Saturday. You know, some would even say have a chance to pull the upset. I just don't see it. Of course, I've got the Georgia shirt on today. Some people say I'm just a homer. Some people say that I'm just biased. But nonetheless, off the top of the program today, I'll try to explain why I think it's just, complete fallacy that this is the kind of game that's frankly even going to be close once you get to the fourth quarter on Saturday. We've also got Jeff Sintel coming up for our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. I'll tell you more about our big event at Marlowe's tomorrow night, and we'll have a whole lot of fun, hopefully, in between. I'm really glad that you're with us as a DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza gets ready to begin right now.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Not quite the SEC Through. Let's try that one more time. So we got our buddy BJ running sound with us. Y'all say hello to BJ in the comment section here today. And what I told him was, I'll tell you the same thing as well. There is almost no mistake on this show that can't be corrected after the fact. Now, here on the video part of it, you get a chance to sort of see it all and kind of roll right through it with us. But, listen, it ain't that serious. We're talking football here. This is not that big of a deal. We're going to have some fun and bring on Jeff later on and roll with the punches as they go here because, listen, that's just the kind of the way it all goes down here. So we're glad you're with us, and DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So good to have you with us here today. Fun, busy show coming up. We'll have more on our situation with the quarterbacks, Jake Fromm, Justin Fields, in just a little bit, including what Kirby Smart had to say yesterday. We'll kind of get to all that here coming up in just a moment. Let me start the show this way, though. I am a big believer that Georgia's going to win the game on Saturday against South Carolina. I think Georgia's going to win the game actually fairly handily. I just don't think it's going to be all that close. Now, yesterday, I spent a good bit of time on the program talking about one thing that I did think that South Carolina could do to Georgia to put some pressure on the Bulldogs. I do think that Jake Bentley's a better quarterback moving into his sort of more experienced age as the Gamecock starter. Much like Kirby Smart, who we'll hear from later on in this subject, I do have great respect for South Carolina, a wide receiver, Deebo Samuel, also kick returner, who kind of comes back from an injury here. But ultimately, the advantage that South Carolina may enjoy with the wide receivers in comparison to Georgia secondary, I think is trumped by an even bigger advantage that Georgia has in this game. And ultimately, it's the kind of advantage that decides football games more often than not. Frankly, I think that South Carolina is very weak along its defensive line. And I think that Georgia, with a great offensive line, which is what I do believe Georgia will have here in 2018, and running backs, even with no James Cook in the first half and an injury to Zamir White, that's going to make him out for the entire season. I just think the Georgia backs, the Georgia offensive line, just shove the South Carolina defensive line all over the field on Saturday, open wide, gaping holes. Georgia racks up a whole bunch of rushing yards, and then whatever Jake Fromm in the passing attack adds to that will just be the gravy on top. But ultimately, Georgia is a more physical team than South Carolina, although South Carolina did give Georgia a taste of its physical medicine a year ago, and that's ultimately going to be the deciding factor in the game. And just to sort of make this not just be like blowhardy stuff, guy with a Georgia shirt on, picking Georgia to win the game. I went and looked at one of my preseason magazines to sort of, look at the South Carolina defensive line here for a moment. And let me see if I can back up with numbers what I just said right there with my own words. I mean, look at what, this is the Street and Smiths magazine I happen to have in my hand here. But look at what they have for like the two deep for the South Carolina defensive line. Keir Thomas, former three-star, just 265 pounds. Aaron Sterling, former three-star, just 240 pounds. Kobe Smith, former three-star, 293 pounds. Javon Kinlaw is a pretty good player. He's a former four-star junior college prospect. He's over 300 pounds, so you got to be careful about him. Jabari Ellis, a former three-star. Shameik Blackshear, the only real four-star in the group from that has previous experience. DJ Wanham, who's been a little bit banged up. Daniel Fennell, both former three-stars. They don't have Kingsley Ngabari here. I think he's legitimately a pretty good freshman prospect. He probably plays. But that's a lot of three-star guys, much less than 300 pounds, who are going to be sort of battling with Georgia here on Saturday. And like I said, I think that Georgia, when you think about Andrew Thomas, when you think about Ben Cleveland, when you think about one of the best centers in the country, Lamont Gilliard, when you think about whomever gets picked to start at left guard to go along with the former five-star Isaiah Wilson there at right tackle, you're talking about a Georgia offensive line that I just think is destined to really assert itself in a major way against the Gamecocks on Saturday. But, of course, as a way of being fair and balanced here for a moment, you did see the South Carolina defense, albeit against a much weaker opponent in Coastal Carolina. I think they had, like 11 tackles for loss or something like that against the Chanticleers the other day. But if you listen to Will Muschamp after the game, much like Kirby Smart wasn't too excited about the things that happened against Austin Peay, Muschamp was less than enthralled by seeing his team play a glorified high school team like Coastal Carolina. Here is what Will Muschamp had to say after that game about his defensive line, kind of leading the way for a decent little collection of tackles for loss. Here's Muschamp.
We don't really go into we're just trying to stay ahead of the sticks. And so I don't know what number that would be. I've never looked at it that way. Maybe that we should. I think it's a good question, but we always I'm just talking in terms in my mind. In the conversations I have with T-Rob on the headsets, are we staying ahead in the sticks? If we need to give them more bad snaps, if we need an opportunity for more bad snaps. Most of the yards we gave up was at the end, which was frustrating. We'll go back and look at it, and certainly when we're ahead of the sticks, we can be an effective team.
Ahead of the sticks is one of those sort of classic, coaching phrases here, and sort of staying on schedule defensively, or maybe better said, keeping an offense off schedule, means asserting yourself on those early downs. And against Georgia, that's just very difficult to do because of the work that Sam Pittman and Kirby Smart have done establishing a top-flight offensive line for the Georgia Bulldogs. But here's where things also get a bit interesting for Georgia, because if you listen to Kirby Smart going back to yesterday's press conference, looking back on the game to open the season against Austin Peay, and I'm assuming here also including some data that he observed from Georgia's scrimmages during August, while the offensive line may do its job, apparently there's still more that Kirby Smart wants to see from his running backs. And a little quick backstory on this. If you read my By the Numbers piece at DawgNation.com last week, one of the things I talked about was the advanced stat that gets kicked around on Football Outsiders and Bill Connelly's Football Study Hall, offensive line yards, the first 5 yards, half the next 5 yards for a running back carry sort of gets attributed to the offensive line. Everything on top of that, the sort of explosive play beyond that, gets attributed to the running back. I wrote about that a little bit at DawgNation.com this week. I think that's, kind of the mindset that Kirby Smart's adopting here of the offensive line may open some holes against South Carolina, but then when the running back runs through it, whether it be Elijah Holyfield, DeAndre Swift, whomever, when they run through that, they've got to make the next wave of defenders miss to turn a small gain into a big gain. And while I think that will happen on Saturday, it is important to note that's what's on Kirby Smart's mind right now heading into Columbia and the Gamecocks this weekend. Here he is yesterday challenging his running backs to provide a little bit more.
We've got to have some more explosive runs. In our run game, we probably have not been as explosive as we were last year, which that includes scrimmages. We didn't have the number of explosive runs you might have expected Saturday. I'm not going to say those guys ran the ball poorly. They ran the ball hard, but they probably missed the hole a couple times and probably a little impatient. And sometimes staying behind their blocking schemes and trying to bounce things out when we've got to commit to keeping it inside. But they would be the first to tell you that. As a matter of fact, a couple of them came off the field and said they missed it at the time. But their effort was there. If they continue to work hard with good ball security, then we can have a positive running game.
Yeah, listen, can you turn a 5-yard gain into a 15-yard gain? Now, I've already said on Saturday I believe that will happen. I believe Georgia's going to put up big yardage in the running game. But it's got to be more than just offensive linemen blowing up holes. It's also got to be, running backs making guys miss. And from that standpoint, I do think James Cook not playing for the first half is somewhat significant here. Now, Chip Tower sort of downplayed that a bit when he joined the show yesterday, and obviously it is true that Georgia will have Cook for the second half, and given the fact that Georgia's got Holyfield and Swift and Herring, it's not all that clear how much Cook would have played and touched the football in the first half anyway. But the threat of Cook getting the ball is what's potentially dangerous here, and he's also kind of got the speed and elusiveness to create the kind of explosions in the offense that Kirby Smart just described. So that's an important part to kind of keep in mind on this. But then there's also this other wrinkle on all of this, and we saw this a bit on Saturday as well. Now, when it comes to big plays from Georgia in the running game, it's not just the running backs in 2018 who are necessarily going to provide that. One of the most thrilling moments of all against Austin Peay this past Saturday was the handoff that Demetrius Robertson took on what we think of as sort of a jet sweep, taking that all the way to the house. Now, Kirby says he wasn't even sprinting at the end, but nonetheless, it was a pretty big touchdown there for Georgia. And now all of a sudden, if you're South Carolina, selling out along the front of the defensive line to stop those big, powerful backs and those big, powerful offensive linemen for opening up those holes up the middle, all of a sudden now the outside is an issue. The jet sweep to the outside or something maybe even more creative than that. And Kirby said in the modern day game of college football, the stuff like Georgia did on Saturday is almost an imperative to win games like the one the Dogs will play this weekend. Here's more of Kirby talking about the way that his offense now packages plays inside and outside both.
whether you run the ball with a speed sweep or you run the ball with a inside zone, everybody knows in college football those plays are packaged together. So a lot of time it's what the defense gives you. I mean, these people aren't. Y'all may see it as a handoff to Demetrius Robertson, but that's not actually what the play was. The play has two options to it. So with every play, there's two plays, and usually an inside play and an outside play. That's what college football is. It might be a run, it might be a pass, it might be a handoff. But I think you use the tools you have, but you take what the defense gives you. If it gives you the outside run, then you run it outside. If they give you the inside run, then you run it inside. If they give you neither, then you got to find a way to throw the ball. We got to be good at inside, outside run, and the ability to throw the ball, because it's just hard to run the ball in our conference, whether it's perimeter or inside. You've got to be able to create plays through the passing game.
So listen, I mean, if there's a South Carolina fan listening right now, and y'all know there's always a couple that seem to tune in every single week when their team plays Georgia, or they're just sort of curious what's going on here on DawgNation Daily. You know what they're thinking right now. They hate this entire discussion. They think we're not giving South Carolina enough credit in the game. And listen, in college football, strange things can obviously happen. But also, the game in itself is just not that complicated. The bigger, stronger, more athletic team is typically going to win, especially when that strength is sort of congregated right there around the line of scrimmage. And Georgia, really on both lines of scrimmage, I think has a significant advantage in this game this weekend, especially here with its big offensive linemen, a collection of former 4 and 5 stars, shoving around a whole lot of former 3 stars, a lot of guys who aren't quite as beefy up front. I think that makes opportunities for the Georgia running game up the middle. And then when South Carolina sort of overcommits to stop that, maybe you do get the jet sweep to the outside. Or as Kirby Smart just referenced, maybe you get more from the passing game as well. My point here is I actually kind of expect a lot of points from Georgia on Saturday because I simply don't think the Gamecocks are capable of stopping UGA. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Marco's Pizza, and we're really glad you're with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, DawgNation YouTube, the DawgNation Twitter feed, on the radio at noon, and it's great to be back with our friends in Athens today on the radio after the holiday yesterday, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player there for the Android devices, SoundCloud, the world-famous DawgNation.com, just however you're getting to us. Thanks so much for being with us. And really, I thank you so much for your continued support of our friends there at Marco's Pizza, who help me bring DawgNation Daily to you every single day. And what I love hearing from you when you tell me about Marco's Pizza is they seem to just satisfy everybody every single time because it's authentic Italian quality pizza at an unbelievable price. I mean, that's a real winner in every way, shape, form you can imagine. I just talked a moment ago about the inside and the outside combination for Georgia. The combination of authentic Italian quality pizza at a great price is a pretty good 1-2 punch from Marco's Pizza there as well. Right now you can get 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for $6.99 each. So say hello, Primo, by going to Marcos.com and taking advantage of that everyday offer. No coupon to cut, no promo code to remember. It is simply every store, every day, the Italian way, right there at Marcos.com. And it is great to have them with us on the program today. Let me also shift gears here and do our Around the Doghouse. We take a look at the things happening around the University of Georgia here as we head towards the start of the SEC season here coming up this Saturday. Of course, Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily today, brought to you by our friends at Brasstown Valley Resort in Towns County. Good to have them with us on the program, and what a great way to spend the fall, especially when you're thinking about maybe the off day coming up. We'll tell you more about Brasstown Valley Resort here in just a moment. But let me, before we get to that, kind of dive into a topic that we didn't really address at all yesterday. We didn't talk about this, really whatsoever. I just think that as we sort of get into the season, the Fromm Fields debate almost becomes less relevant. Not because I don't think that Justin Fields has a role in this team. I think he potentially does. And I'll tell you more in a moment about what I think his role might ultimately be. But because, when you get into this game, being on the road, hostile environment, against, listen, I just told you I think that Georgia's going to beat South Carolina. It doesn't mean that South Carolina is not a formidable foe. I believe in a lot of ways the Gamecocks really are. This is the kind of game where I think that Georgia's likely to lean a bit more on Jake Fromm. Now, yesterday, to his credit, DawgNation's Chip Towers had a chance to ask Kirby Smart directly, what is the plan for these two quarterbacks? Is this Fromm starting? Is this Fields getting in the game, much like he did against Austin Peay? And as you might imagine, and I guess as he probably should, Georgia coach Kirby Smart keeping his cards very close to the vest. Here's the exchange yesterday between Chip and Kirby.
Kirby, I guess I'll be the one to ask about the quarterbacks this week. I guess Justin came in fourth series or so and then played a good bit. Is there a plan per se for him, or where Jake start and then the game will dictate what you do after that?
The later, for sure. It's just a situation where there's no plan. we got to go with how things go and how the flow of the game goes. And I thought he did a good job Saturday in the game, handled things well. But I don't know what this game's going to dictate, what this game's going to bring. So we'll see.
So listen, here's my point on both Fromm and Fields right now. I think that Jake Fromm is the starter in this team, and I think you need to rally around your starter and believe in that guy going into a game like South Carolina. Luckily, Fromm's the kind of guy that Georgia can believe in, and I believe these players and coaches do believe in. So I think they'll lean on Fromm heavily for this game coming up on Saturday. But I guess the other point that I'll also sort of make here is that doesn't mean there can't still be a role for Justin Fields. And ultimately, Kirby says there's no plan for how to handle Fields at the moment. Ultimately, what you do with Justin Fields in a game like this, if he does get involved, it actually may not have anything to do with Jake Fromm whatsoever. I mean, I think a lot of us assume that if Fields came into a game, he'd come into the game because somehow Fromm is struggling. But what if, I just talked about, the need for explosive plays out of the offense, and me believing that, against an opponent like South Carolina, with weakness potentially along its defensive line, a lack of former elite prospects, a lack of beef, that Georgia's going to lean on that and exploit that for the win. But what if, with no Zamir White because of injury or no James Cook in the first half, what if those big holes aren't being opened up and turned into big gains at that point in time? That's when you actually may need to lean on Fields a bit more, putting him in the game for a running play, not because Jake Fromm's not doing what he needs to do, but because you need the extra boost for the Georgia running game. So it's a lot for Kirby Smart to think about. Luckily, he's the guy to obviously process all that, and he and Jim Chaney and the quarterbacks coach James Coley no doubt will get all of that done. Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily today is brought to you by Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa in Towns County, Georgia. Really excited to have them on board, and you're going to love Brasstown Valley Resort if you've never been up there in the beautiful North Georgia mountains. I'm talking about great looking resort. Also great dining, championship golf. Got horse stables there, a 7,500 square foot spa, so much more. It's for you and your significant other, the whole family, whatever. And next week, I'm going to start talking here on DawgNation Daily about how you can be a big winner and maybe receive a giveaway from Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa, which here on Around the Doghouse could potentially be pretty lucky, because I know a lot of you guys this time of year get to watching football so much that you actually get yourself in the doghouse. This may be a good way to get out of the doghouse with Brasstown Valley Resort right there in beautiful Towns County, Georgia. All right, it is great to have you with us here today on a DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up. Let me shift gears here for a moment, though. Talk a little UGA recruiting. Let's do Jeff Sintel on our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Got a big event at Marlowe's Tavern coming up on Wednesday. We'll tell you more about that here throughout the course of our conversation of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All here with Jeff Sintel. Before that, though, let's talk a little recruiting with Jeff. And first of all, Jeff, let me say good morning. Thanks so much for being with us. Really enjoyed seeing you on Saturday in Athens for our Northside Hospital postgame show. Love reading your freshman report there at DawgNation.com. What a great addition to the website that is. So good stuff from you around the game on Saturday. Thanks so much for that.
Hey, Brennan, man, I'm great. Hope everybody's having themselves a first week of SEC play. Tuesday, hope everybody enjoyed a good day of Labor Day activities and grills and burgers and dogs and all that. And I guess it's definitely go time for us. The paycheck game is out of the way.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And, on the subject of UGA recruiting here for a moment, I guess this is, I think, what psychologists call a Rorschach test. I think I've got this right, where you sort of look at things and sort of see what you want to see. And for me, when I'm watching a lot of college football games, I sort of end up just sort of like bringing them all back to Georgia recruiting. That probably tells you more about my personality than it does the actual events at hand. But, I'm watching Florida State last night, and they legitimately struggled to against Virginia Tech. There had been some online rumors that Tresman Marshall was going to attend the game. I know you reported at DawgNation.com last week that Nakobe Dean, the five-star linebacker, really enjoyed his recent event to Florida State. When you see Willie Taggart sort of stub his toe there in his debut as Seminoles coach, does that have any impact whatsoever on Georgia recruiting? I guess on the one hand, it becomes the this is how bad we need you type game where it's used to sell early playing time. On the other hand, maybe it calls into question just how ready he is to lead a program of that magnitude. When you think about the overlap between Florida State and Georgia, that game last night have any impact whatsoever on that?
Well, I think it just is a kind of a litmus test and a barometer for where each program is at. I would say that the beauty contest between Georgia right now and Florida State for those two key recruits is maybe Florida State slipped on the catwalk and did a face plant and broke her tiara, something like that, on the on the beauty contest right now with Georgia after Georgia just handled its business against Austin Peay. I know Nakobe Dean has told me he doesn't want to come into a place where he can start right away. Brandon, I think Nakobe Dean can start right away right now for Florida State as well as Trezman Marshall. I just don't know how the previous coach parlayed the depth chart he left behind in garnering $75 million over 10 years from Texas A&M. When you look at Florida State right now, and it looks like they are just fairly deficient on both the offensive line and at linebacker.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to ask you about this, but I guess hearing you talk also brings to mind what happened a year ago where you said, deficient on the offensive line. It's amazing how that's been a problem for the Seminoles now for really quite some time. When you look back to last year, Justin Fields, I think, at one point was pretty interested in Florida State. How much of that factored in him ultimately not going there? The fact that whether it was Jimbo Fisher a year ago, even still Willie Taggart right now, that this once behemoth powerhouse program just couldn't do anything along the offensive line. Did that ultimately impact Fields? Because it seems like it would have had to have.
Brandon, my man, totally different Fields question than I was expecting from you today, sir. I give you credit for that. It's pretty simple. I mean, Justin was, I think we can talk about this now. Justin was part of a cadre of players that were looking at the Bulldogs, and when you think of an Andrew Thomas now, Trey Hill, Jamari Salyer, Isaiah Wilson, Torrey Johnson already there. There's a lot of players right there, and I don't know if Florida State even has one or two guys quite like that, what Georgia has stacked up, and it doesn't go without saying about the wide receivers, Karis Jackson, and what Georgia was, potentially going to load up at running back with Zamir White and James Cook. There's just a lot of pieces right now. And you know what? What I really thought about watching FSU was sometimes the brilliance of Cam Akers in spite of that offensive line play.
Oh, yeah.
And, maybe one subject we haven't really explored too much on the UGA recruiting front, even on your show, Brandon, is like, I wonder, what would have happened had Sony and Nick went to the NFL that year. I think there is a good puncher's chance that maybe Cam Akers would have wound up in Athens as well. That's just something to think about that will never be, but it's an interesting postscript on the Georgia 2017 recruiting class.
Yeah, that's one of those great, summertime long conversations where you can sort of hash out all the things that could have unfolded differently for the better or the worse or just different. But that's a really interesting what-if scenario there. It's Jeff Sintel here as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All each week here on a DawgNation Daily. And speaking of Marlowe's Tavern, DawgNation really excited about being back tomorrow night at the Marlowe's there in Dunwoody for our DawgNation Big Game Preview. It starts at 6 p.m. Our friends from Terrapin Brewery going to be on hand. What a great local Athens brewery to delicious stuff. They're going to be on hand tomorrow night on the front lawn. The folks from Marlowe's Tavern are going to have the smoker out there firing that thing up. Last year they were smoking some of the best brisket you'll ever have. This is just going to be a great event starting tomorrow night at 6 p.m. And I'm really proud to announce, I mentioned this yesterday, let me say this again, that our buddy Brandon Cablano, the former Georgia offensive lineman, one of the guys that laid the foundation for the success that Kirby Smart's having now, a part of Kirby's first team there in 2016. Brandon Cablano going to be on hand with us as well. It's all at the Marlowe's Tavern in Dunwoody. Let me see that graphic one more time if you don't mind so I can read the address for the folks who are listening either on the radio or on the podcast. It's Marlowe's in Dunwoody, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. That's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. That comes up tomorrow night starting at 6 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. All right, Jeff, let me turn the page here on our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All to the sort of wishful thinking portion of our interview, and I'm going to ask you some very hopeful questions, and you can tell me why they may not be all that pertinent for right now. But I mentioned off the top, Florida State does not look good on Monday night, and maybe that impacts Georgia recruiting. There are more than a few Georgia fans also wondering, Michigan goes to South Bend, losing to Notre Dame. More of the same for Jim Harbaugh, who I believe is just, 8-8 in his last 16 games as a Michigan coach. He's, really not really playing at the top level here at the moment. And they wonder what might kind of impact might that have on a guy like, say, Chris Hinton, the defensive lineman from Greater Atlanta Christian, whose dad played in the NFL, a guy who has, a lot of insight into how the recruiting business sort of works here, but emotions can be swayed for anybody. And is Hinton's emotion swayed by the fact that the team he's committed to, once again, sort of lays a big egg on a national stage? What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a non-conference game. That's the first thing maybe a Michigan apologist would think about there. The second thing is it's, kind of tongue-in-cheek here, Brandon. I'm just going to say, trust the process of a flip. And right now, Michigan needs to go through about 2 or 3 more losses like that one, because I know a lot of Michigan fans, and they were thinking about Harbaugh's plan for world domination versus the plan for survival. And there's a lot of losable games on that schedule. There's Notre Dame, there's Nebraska, there's Michigan State, there's Wisconsin, there's Ohio State, there's Penn State, notwithstanding the Appalachian State situation of the past weekend. But I think that was one of those that Michigan fans hoped that they would have put in the win column on the ledger. So now it makes a lot of those more minefields on the schedule look a lot more dicey. So if the flipometer, if you had one of those in the studio, Brandon, it maybe moved a little bit more closer towards, just pulled out of the freezer, and now it's moving a little bit towards thaw. But still a ways to go on that one, sir.
Along the same lines, at the forum this week at forum.DawgNation.com, there had been some talk, given the fact that Georgia's playing South Carolina this week, of, hey, whatever happened to Zach Pickens, the 5-star defensive lineman from T.L. Hanna, one of the powerhouses there in the Palmetto State, who is committed to South Carolina here. Is Georgia even still in on him? Is there still a recruitment going on there? To the forum, folks are asking about that. Jeff, with South Carolina looming on Saturday, are the Dogs still in it for Pickens? They have different priorities? Are they thinking 2020 DL more so, we're adding another 2019 guy? I mean, what is the sort of scenario right now, Georgia's relationship with Zach Pickens here?
Well, Georgia's still going to try to recruit him. I would imagine Georgia will be at his game in force in South Carolina this week, because they will be down there for the game in Columbia early on Friday. So, I would think you would see some Georgia presence on a recruiting sideline there for D.L. Hanna, as long as he's still playing in the greater upstate. I just think, let's not dice it any way but the truth here. Zach Pickens is one of the 5 best defensive linemen in the country. And should he change his mind, which seems pretty locked in right now in South Carolina, should he change his mind, then I think Georgia is still recruiting him enough to keep the road fires burning, I guess, a little bit, or the out-of-state fires burning. But right now, I mean, and what that would mean is it would be a domino effect. Georgia would likely look at its board, maybe look at even a commitment and say, we need Zach Pittman on the team. Zach Pickens on the team, and they would go from there, trying to adjust the roster downward, or the commitment board, pledge board downward.
Just to follow up on that point, Jeff, I've probably got a lot of Gamecocks fans mad at me, because I do think Georgia's going to blow out South Carolina on Saturday. So they probably don't like that. But the one thing they ought to like, I'm going to give actually some credit and some respect here. I think that what Will Muschamp's doing on the recruiting trail, sort of quiet as kept, is actually pretty impressive. You and I talk about recruiting, 3 times a week officially, unofficially off the air, many more times other than that. And, we could go an entire year and never mention Tennessee taking a player that Georgia wants, never mention that Florida takes a player that Georgia wants. Even a recruiting power supposedly like Auburn, only occasionally these days really gets involved and takes a player that Georgia really wants. But South Carolina, it's happened a few times here. Daniel, the defensive back the other day. Sandage, the defensive lineman for the 2018 class. I'll put Jemias Williams in that group, even though Williams is sort of having a hard time finding his home there at South Carolina. For the class of 2017, he's in that group. Georgia envious of a guy like Zach Pickens right now, who's a South Carolina commit. Listen, I don't know where it ultimately ends for Muschamp at South Carolina, but in terms of recruiting rivals, Muschamp's actually one of the only recruiting rivals in the SEC that Georgia seems to have at the moment.
Yeah, they've done some good jobs, and what they've been able to do there, Brandon, is they've been able to kind of, I guess, zoom in on a specific situation and find the right and the ideal target. The little recruiting backstory here for South Carolina, they've got a pretty good class coming together. That class, they've got 2 players, and Pickens is one of those, one of the rare 5-stars for the program, Brandon. They've only had a handful of those guys. And then you've got the quarterback, Ryan Helinski, as well, which are 2 of, if you look on the new charts that are put out by 24/7 Sports, those are 2 of the top 20 recruits that the South Carolina Gamecocks have ever signed or on track to sign at all. That's 2 of their top 20 recruits all time. But you look at a guy like Zach Pickens, for example, 5-star and nation's #1 strong side defensive end, and he's still the number 18 player in the country. that would seem like, I don't know, it would be kind of be like the Trevon Walker news for Georgia right now. It would be big for this class. It would be a centerpiece for the class. It would be another 5-star to the ledger. But Georgia signed a bunch of those players over the last few years where Zach Pickens might become the 4th or 5th 5-star in the history of the program, whereas Georgia currently has 21 of those guys on the roster right now.
I think you're bringing up a good point. Obviously, the larger picture for South Carolina is that Muschamp hasn't won enough of these battles to sort of fill out a full roster. That's why it's not a top 25 team right now, and only sort of a bottom-tier top 25 team likely by the end of the season. But, I mean, credit where credit's due here, the fact that he's even getting any of those because – gosh, right now, Florida seems to be shopping at a different supermarket than the Dogs are at the moment. Let me shift gears here. Jeff, I don't know how much you and I talked about this, but I was actually blown away by how much I enjoyed the whole new look and vibe of the West End Zone on Saturday. I don't know if this is just me being really excited about the start of the season or if it really was as cool as it looked. If you're watching on video, I'm a big pro wrestling fan. This was a very pro wrestling style entrance for Georgia on Saturday. A lot more smoke, the sort of shotgun tunnel they kind of run out on with the LED boards on both sides. Obviously, the student section kind of behind there looks great. I mean, for me, I got a lot of chills just sort of like watching this go down. I thought the new video board was an improvement, even though it's not that different. It was still, for some reason, a sort of aesthetic improvement for me. I mean, Jeff, recruits had to like this, right? Because I thought it was like just a really cool moment for Sanford Stadium. Just the whole thing was kind of a nice vibe for me. I would imagine this had to work on recruits, right?
Yeah, it was an upgrade for Georgia as well. They especially liked the fact that previously Georgia had to put them on through this kind of like, where's my cheese type maze throughout Sanford to get them to an athletic association box on one of the upper levels of Sanford Stadium to get a snack. If grandma was roasting in the heat, well, then that was a problem. Small children, younger brothers and sisters as well. And now that new recruiting lounge is pretty easy. One of the recruits told me that basically they have food there for you to eat and eat and eat. The nice view from the recruiting lounge onto the dog walk was an upgrade. The ability to, in like the new 33% larger, video board, they still incorporate running through the Georgia G and the banner. They've got fans behind them. The way the recruits now flank both alleyways or both, they kind of serve as like maybe barrels of the tunnel that flank the way the young men run out of the locker room now. It's an upgrade for Georgia, and it adds to the game day experience a lot. It is a little different from a reporter's perspective because you used to have all the players all lined up neatly in about 6 rows, 6 horizontal rows to see who's there. And now they're more like, 4 or 5 rows that only go about 6 or 7 or 8 folks deep, but they go about 25, 30 rows up. So it kind of ruins your picture angles for a lot of those guys. But the ability for them to duck in and out and eat, great. I think it'll be a lot different when Georgia plays a marquee opponent, especially even in the late evenings where it gets a little colder, and the Savannah type temperatures of Sanford Stadium will stay tucked away in early September. A nice upgrade for Georgia, and we said this before, Brandon. Look at the way Georgia recruited before, and these things, if it can be improved, they can only help it.
Yeah, I think my point is I thought it was better than I expected to be. I knew it would be different. I didn't think it'd be that much of a change, but I thought the whole look was just a real improvement, a real upgrade. The whole vibe, and you said it, Jeff, it was so hot on Saturday, so ultimately you kind of compete with the heat to sort of create the environment that you want. But at the beginning of the game, it felt like a big game. And then after that, it sort of turned into G-Day. But at the very beginning of the game, it felt like a really nice vibe there. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All here on Tuesdays with a Jeff Sintel on DawgNation Daily. And I mentioned we have a big event coming up at Marlowe's tomorrow, and there's a lot of big events at the Marlowe's closest to you. And to find out more about them or get the special offers, I keep thinking about back on the 4th of July when Marlowe's gave away a free burger to like everybody on its Insider Club. That's why you want to be a Marlowe's Tavern Insider. Simply text the word Marlowe's. That's MARLOWS, no apostrophe, just MARLOWS to 24242, and you can become a Marlowe's Tavern Insider, and you can find out about big events and special offers taking place at the Marlowe's Tavern near you. Let me finish with this, Jeff, if you don't mind, and this is not a very serious point, I will grant you, but I thought it was a very good point by you. You kind of wrote about this a bit in your freshman report at DawgNation.com, and I believe you also mentioned this on our Northside Hospital postgame show. The the fact that Adam Anderson's wearing 56. Now, I'm going to date myself here. I may date you in the process. 56 is a linebacker's number. And you kind of talked about this. I think back to the great, Lawrence Taylor, I guess, wore 56. A lot of great linebackers, wore that number in the 80s when I was growing up. There's so much attraction with the single-digit numbers, the low two-digit numbers these days. Don't you love the fact that Adam Anderson sort of keeping it old school and wearing like a classic linebacker's number? I mean, how much does an old guy in his 40s like me appreciate that?
I tell you, Adam was a stylish dude on Saturday. He came into the game with a nice little, I guess I would call it a purple hinted, maybe metallic purple hinted bow tie. And then he had the matching sunglasses on to match along with his sport coat. And then he walked in and he rocked that number 56, made a couple of big plays in space. And he was also the recipient of the first SmackDown Sunday of the season. That's where Georgia inside linebackers coach Glenn Schumann usually tweets out a video clip of the biggest crash, boom, bang from a Bulldog defender from the previous game. And Adam Anderson squared up a guy in space and did what he was supposed to do and let his pads do the talking. That's a guy. The Georgia trend right now is definitely to get that talented athlete, that 5-star in a lower number. But, who knows with Adam Anderson? Maybe he might just have the type of freshman season that makes him think number 56 is okay. And the other thing to think about it is if you look at all those low numbers for Georgia, they are often occupied by underclassmen as well. So maybe Adam Anderson wouldn't even get a chance to wear one of those for a couple years anyway in Athens.
Yeah, this will be my sort of old man get off my lawn moment, but I'd love nothing more for Anderson to sort of usher in a new age where guys go back to wearing traditional football numbers again. I would really appreciate that. Let me also finish this real quickly, Jeff, on, I guess, a more serious subject. Just sort of a catch-all here, your sort of takeaway. You had a good take there on Anderson, but just overall, what did you see from Georgia freshmen on Saturday? You've obviously, probably, crunched the game film here a couple times now. Certainly you watched it close inside the stadium. What else should we kind of keep in mind as we get ready to say goodbye to you here?
Let me go quickly here. DeAndre Swift is very special. He will be a bell cow in any potential Georgia game-winning game plan victory against South Carolina. Tyson Campbell can really run really, really fast. Same goes for Miko Hardman and Demetrius Robertson. I don't think the secondary is worth worrying about. I know folks like to worry about things going into big games, but I think Kirby let out something, maybe it was in one of his recent pressers of the last 2 days or so, where Coach Smart mentioned that he feels good about his defensive backs, he feels good about his corners, he just feels that they need to go play now. He thinks all the ability and skill sets in the world are there. A lot of very interesting things. I thought D'Angelo Gibbs played very well. He made some great plays. There was one play where he maybe tucked his head a little bit too low, didn't have his head up. But then on another play, I think he tried to annihilate a young man with a truck stick. And then he played several plays in space, just kind of tracking down, taking good angles. And one particular pass play, I thought he closed down really well on the Austin P receiver as well. Lots of good things for Georgia. You see James Cook getting in very early. I think one of the things that struck me is, and there's a picture on DawgNation.com on the freshman report, that young man runs the football at very interesting angles. It almost looks like, I don't know, like it's one of those mirrors in a fun house where he's standing straight up, but it looks like his whole body is slanted maybe at a 45 or 130-degree angle. He just runs with a very interesting type of body lean that allows him to wiggle, herky-jerky his way through holes. As always, lots of great things to like about the Georgia Bulldogs, and I think that was a good warm-up test for the day. And another thing that recruits told me, which is all that matters, maybe this is the get-off-my-lawn moment for everyone out there I can share for the recruiting perspective from Saturday. The recruits really liked the new DJ. They really liked the music. I don't think I heard Journey or Rick Springfield or what other some timeless classics he used to play in Sanford Stadium on Saturday. And I think that was a big hit with the younger set who would potentially sign to play football for Georgia.
Well, that's certainly good news, Jeff. That's what really matters. We appreciate you being here on our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All today. And speaking of Marlowe's, don't forget tomorrow, DawgNation going to be on hand 6 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody for our DawgNation Big Game Preview. Looking ahead to Saturday against the Gamecocks, I'll be there. Brandon Cablano, the former Georgia great offensive lineman, he's going to be on hand as well. Terrapin Brewery, the smoker out front on the lawn. It's a great, great party, a great way to sort of get the 2018 season started in style. We'll look forward to seeing you there 6 p.m. tomorrow. It's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. That's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway for the Marlows in Dunwoody. We'll see you there. Jeff, I'll also see you Wednesday for Before the Hedges. Can't wait to talk a little recruiting with you, presented by Kroger, and hope you have a great time between now and then.
All right, guys, have a great week. See everybody in Columbia. Again, make those plans now.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, y'all know Jeff's my buddy, and I like him, but I really want you to read that freshman report he did at DawgNation.com, and here's part of it. And listen, this is going to – I'll be careful how I say this because obviously, what we do is a labor of love, and we love it. But that kind of stuff, when you have to, chronicle snap counts and who gets in a game and who doesn't, that's hard work. So, that's one of those things that you don't get all that data just from watching the game one time. Kind of go back and sort of, crawl through some of that over and over again. Pause that DVR a few times to make sure you get all 11 on the screen there. So Jeff putting a lot of work to get that done, and it's a really good read because I found myself, it's kind of weird. By the time the game ended on Saturday and we were getting ready to do our Northside Hospital post-game show, I'm not really even sure that that I knew all the really big plays in the game because I'd spent so much of what we were trying to do. I spent so much of what we were trying to do just trying to figure out who was in the game. Solomon Kinley starting. Akil Crumpton getting the first punt return. William Poole working in as a star early in the game. I just sort of found myself sort of gravitating towards a lot of the personnel even in the game, that some of the big plays may have gone right over my head at first glance. I've been trying to rewatch the game a little bit ever since then, but football games got a lot of action, a lot of guys in the field, and Jeff did a good job chronicling all that freshman stuff because who plays, who doesn't play, who's in line for more playing time, especially with a road game in the SEC coming up where you can only take 70. That's a pretty important storyline. I thought Jeff Sintel did a really good job of sort of chronicling all of that. As our SEC through, the a cappella version of the SEC through rolls on here, I will mention a couple things here. Alabama coach Nick Saban did let it be known yesterday that Tua Tagovailoa is going to be the Alabama starting quarterback, I presume, here going forward here a bit, which makes what he did with Maria Taylor on Saturday night even seem more poorly calculated. It almost seems like in the aftermath here, this was his way of sort of showing some defense and some support for Jalen Hurts to maybe curry favor with some of his Hurts teammates and Saban's players there in the Alabama locker room. And it just goes to show, as I said yesterday, and I'll stand by this, I think that there are two versions of Nick Saban. I think both of them are completely phony. I think he's a phony tough guy and a phony nice guy. And I think he accidentally did the phony tough guy routine when he meant to do the phony nice guy routine with Maria Taylor. That's the issue they got into, as opposed to being less calculated, which would have been the right play here. When Tua was the better quarterback a year ago, he should have just made him the starter then, and he wouldn't have any of this problem right now. But Saban, who at times can be a little disingenuous, I think was disingenuous throughout this entire process. It blew up with him. But with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback, I mean, let's be honest here on DawgNation Daily, we want to see that rematch with Alabama in December, and obviously on this program, we hope to see Georgia win that game. It pains me to say so, but I must admit, with Tua as the starting quarterback, with a crop of former 5-star and very high 4-star wide receivers, Alabama's a pretty potent offense right now. Are they as good as guys like, Kirk Herbstreit have said, hey, they're going to score 50 points a game, against this schedule? They may do that. I don't know this is one of the great offenses of all time. I don't even know that it's dramatically better than Georgia's offense, which I think is going to score its share of points this season too. But it is good, and it is better. I mean, we saw that firsthand in the national championship game. Tua over Hurts is an upgrade. So Saban has finally arrived at the right choice here, and we'll see how Alabama responds to that. We'll see if Jalen Hurts, as a non-starting quarterback, can be a functioning, capable, contributing member of this Alabama team. I think a lot of that remains to be seen given the off-field drama that's occurred with both these quarterbacks. Let me also talk about LSU for a moment, because if you're listening on Thursday during our MyBookie Best Bets segment, I explained that I thought that LSU was going to beat Miami on Sunday. I thought it was the top play for me for the weekend when you looked ahead to the first weekend of SEC action. But now that it has happened, I think you see a very interesting sort of counter reaction to all of this where, picking LSU against Miami going into the game was somewhat of a contrarian play. Most of the public, media included, seemingly was on Miami. with this one, just given the issues that Ed Orgeron's had at LSU. And now that LSU won the game in convincing fashion, all of a sudden now it becomes this conversation of, well, gosh, is LSU now going to be as good as Alabama? Is LSU now going to be a contender to win the SEC West? I think the overreaction to the win is sort of just as bad as the overreaction to the LSU offseason, assuming they had no chance to beat Miami. LSU is still what they were before the Miami game took place. And this is relevant for Georgia, obviously, because Georgia goes there in October. I don't think that Georgia is going to enter that game as a double-digit favorite. I think that LSU is good enough on its home field to be considered, maybe even less than a touchdown underdog against Georgia. But this idea that somehow now LSU is as good as Alabama, or frankly even as good as Auburn, I think that's probably poorly stating this here a bit. LSU won on Sunday because on a composite basis, they are more talented than Miami. But in a game with equal talent, that's when Joe Burrow becomes more important. Can Joe Burrow outplay Jared Stidham? They'll play in a couple of weeks. My guess is no. There's still an LSU team that's going to lose some games this season, but they were more talented at Miami, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And that's the reason why LSU beat Miami on Sunday. Real quick here as we get ready to wrap up our SEC through, let me look ahead to 3 games for this upcoming weekend that I think are really interesting in the SEC. We didn't see Nick Fitzgerald on Saturday. Keaton Thompson, the backup quarterback from Mississippi State, played, and he played well. But it gets really, really challenging for Mississippi State this week, going on the road to Kansas State. You may be aware, those of you who follow the betting public, the coach in college football who has the all-time best record against the point spread, believe it or not, is Bill Snyder from Kansas State, especially at home against ranked teams like Mississippi State. This is a real challenge for the Bulldogs here. We'll find out what they're made of in what they call the Little Apple of Manhattan, Kansas on Saturday. I also think Clemson going to Texas A&M is a very interesting game. The issue here is A&M is good enough to pull some upsets against some teams, but if you go back and look at the recent era for A&M and Kyle Field, even though the stadium is raucous, even though the environment is intense, A&M has not been very good at home. They have had some real struggles at home. The best wins in a SEC era for the Aggies seemingly have all come on the road here. So under Jimbo Fisher, can this be a change from the Kevin Sumlin era? Can A&M actually defend its home turf? That's, I think, the biggest question to deal with Clemson, who is clearly the better team here, but should be on the road in a tough environment. Can A&M actually play well at home for a change? That'll be interesting to see. And then, of course, the storyline with Kentucky and Florida. Kentucky's got more than a 30-year losing streak to the Gators, but this Gators team is nowhere near as good as the one that has been beaten up on Kentucky for the last 3 decades. So that one may be fun to watch as well, and we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, let me now get our attention back on the game at hand for Georgia on Saturday, South Carolina, and it is a big one, no doubt. I talked a lot on yesterday's show about Deebo Samuel. I have talked a lot about Samuel over the course of the offseason here on DawgNation Daily. I just believe that he's a big-time impact player. Georgia didn't see him a year ago. He'd gotten hurt. But in the couple of games that he played in 2017, he showed his ability both as a wide receiver and a kick returner. You look at a lot of the mock drafts for this upcoming spring, Samuel's listed as a potential first-round pick in many of those. And Kirby Smart said yesterday, when it comes to the attention a lot of these big-time players get, that really Samuel probably doesn't get as much as he deserves. Here's a little bit more of Kirby talking about that.
He's probably the most underrated player in all of college football, because I don't know that everybody in the country knows what the SEC knows about Deebo Samuel. I mean, the guy is phenomenal. When you look at what he's done, even 2 years ago, he gave us fits in that game, and then you turn around and say, okay, he has just a tough injury he has to deal with, but before he had that injury, he had some of the most electric kickoff returns in the country. You see what he's already done in this game, in one game, how explosive he's been at whether it's running back, receiver, and they're creative in ways to find getting him the ball. I mean, he's a 10-touch guy a game, 15-touch guy a game. They're going to find ways to get him the ball through the screen game, the return game, handing it to him. He's an electric football player that's extremely powerful, confident, hard to tackle. He'll be a key guy for us. You got to get him on the ground when he gets the ball, because you don't ever know when it's going to him.
So I think Kirby's right about that. I mean, I think that Deebo Samuel obviously is as advertised. It's one of the reasons why we talked about him as much as we have. And on yesterday's show, I talked a lot about what I thought one of the key storylines in the game is going to be, which is the fact that Georgia in its secondary is going to have a freshman, the former 5-star freshman in Tyson Campbell, but a freshman against these South Carolina receivers, Deebo Samuel included, is obviously a big challenge for Georgia to meet on the road in a hostile environment of Williams-Brice Stadium on Saturday. I think that's all true here. But especially given the fact that, Georgia doesn't have a real history of I wouldn't expect them to, sort of be flopping on the field between Baker and Campbell, depending on where Deebo Samuel lines up. I think Georgia lines up how it lines up, and The offense can do what it wants to do there as well. I don't know that they're going to be trying to hide Tyson Campbell against the South Carolina offense here, at least if Georgia sort of keeps with what's kind of done in the past there in that regard. But here's the other thing to think about. While Georgia's trotting out a freshman in its secondary, and Deebo Samuel could have the potential to exploit that, you also have the opportunity for Georgia to exploit a freshman in South Carolina's secondary as well. Because don't forget, J.C. Horn, guy here from the Atlanta area. We did his commitment ceremony on SEC Country back during the a year or so ago. He's going to start in that South Carolina secondary as well. So if this is one of those situations where South Carolina fans say, hey, we're going to take your freshman D back and we're going to exploit him with our guy, Deebo Samuel, Georgia fans can essentially say the same thing with Demetrius Robertson. I'm assuming a healthy and returning Terry Godwin here, also looking to exploit a South Carolina secondary that features its own freshman there in J.C. Horn. So when it's all said and done, Georgia's got its opportunities to exploit the South Carolina secondary as well, which is one of the reasons why the storylines involving this game are so rich and so much fun to talk about. All right, we will get ready to wrap up our program here today, and we'll do so with our Gatorade Countdown. We believe on this program that Georgia's number one rival, no matter how good they are or how bad they are in any given year, remains the Florida Gators. It's one of the reasons why we talk about it every single day, is a way of reinforcing the point that a good Georgia fan's a Gator hater. And 53 days from right now, Georgia's going to take on those lousy, stinking Gators once again, and they're going to win again, we think. 53 days from right now, it's our Gator Hater Countdown right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Let me also say that you've still got a little bit of time left to go to DawgNation.com. You can find the post that I've written at DawgNation.com. I'm sure you can find the DawgNation Facebook page there as well. The link to our DawgNation Invasion giveaway, courtesy of Kroger. Kroger wants you and a guest to have a chance to join us for the DawgNation Invasion Baton Rouge. We'll talk more about this on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Hurry up and get to DawgNation.com and register for your chance to win. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, we'll look forward to getting a lot of your comments right now. I do have to get off the air early here today. Not early, on time. That's what I meant to say. Not early. I need to get off on time today. But we got some time to knock out some comments here, so we'll get ready to do that. Austin Moore on Facebook says, let me go get Austin's comment here. Sorry about that, Austin. I'll get Austin in a second here. Jacob McMillan says he liked Mays in 42. You think we'll stick with that? I think it's a really interesting question. I know that Cameron Nislek, the former Georgia punter who joined us for our Northside Hospital postgame show on Saturday, was talking about some of the ways in which that benefits Georgia more than just using him as an H-back style player, that it enhances his special teams value to Georgia. He can be the Cam kind of explained that sort of the tight end on a field goal block situation, or blocking for a field goal. So if there was a botched situation there, he becomes an eligible receiver. Cam kind of explained why the 42 on Mays, and also Justin Schaefer, you may have noticed, wore 44 in the game. He sort of explained why those numbers actually end up helping you on special teams a bit there as well. Ultimately, Mays may be a contributor in a 70-something number, or I forget if he's wearing a 60-something or a 70-something number. He may be contributing as a true offensive lineman here before the season's done. But for right now, why not do that? Especially if it gets him on the bus to South Carolina, so you can have that extra offensive lineman in case something really bad happens. Jamie Richardson says, "Be humble, people." And yeah, listen, when it comes to what's going to happen for Georgia on Saturday, obviously anything can happen. We know that. I mean, we know that strange things happen in college football all the time. But the team with the better players mostly wins. I mean, it's not that strange. It's not that unpredictable. Georgia's a sizable favorite here for a reason. I think they'll be an even bigger favorite by the time you get to a kickoff on Saturday. Georgia's going to lean on a much better offensive line, a much better defensive line, better at the positions that really matter. And South Carolina's ability to exploit Deebo Samuel and potentially matching up against Georgia secondary, still working in some new starters, I think ultimately that's going to be fairly limited. I mean, put yourself on the other foot for a moment. Would you want that, if that was your favorite team, to be the only real strength and advantage you had during the game? No, if you were a fan of the other side here, you'd spend most of the week thinking about all the things that you weren't sure you were going to be able to do. That one advantage wouldn't necessarily mean all that much to you in the case of Georgia on Saturday. I think the same thing's kind of true. Randy Hall talking about Trey Hill. Yeah, the one thing that we do know is there is still, I think at this point in time you can say that Ben Cleveland has got a grip on the right guard position. Isaiah Wilson, I think for now, probably has a bit of a hold on the right tackle position. At least I'd be surprised if I saw somebody else over there when it really mattered. Left tackle, obviously, Andrew Thomas. You can pencil him in for the next probably 2 years as an all-SEC type player. He may be gone to the NFL after that. Left guard right now, though, Gilliard, by the way, I should also mention, too, has got that stranglehold on center. Left guard right now is still somewhat up for grabs. Hill was here during the spring. That's obviously an advantage for him. Mays was here during the spring. That's obviously an advantage for him. Jamari Salyer, who was not here during the spring, is kind of an elite prospect. So he may just have the better overall skill set in comparison there. But those young players, battling with Kendall Baker, battling with Solomon Kinley, those young players are forces to be reckoned with. Nakia Hester says, B.A., what's your thoughts on Campbell and Cook? So, I mean, I've been kind of clear on this. I think not having James Cook for the first half on Saturday kind of stinks. I do. I don't think it's the difference between winning and losing because I think Georgia's a lot better than South Carolina. But I think it is going to be very interesting to see. And I tried to make this point about Fromm and Fields earlier, and maybe I didn't make it as effectively as I could. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see who provides explosiveness for Georgia against a real opponent with James Cook not playing. I mean, Elijah Holyfield's a good running back, but is he explosive? DeAndre Swift is a good running back. Is he going to be explosive? He was in the SEC championship game. There's no doubt about that. But, I mean, is Swift as fast as James Cook? I think most people probably say no. So when Kirby says in the audio we played earlier of, hey, I want to see guys, make a man miss. I want to see you turn a 5-yard gain into a 50-yard gain. That feels like something that James Cook is capable of doing. Can Georgia do that without him in the first half against South Carolina? I'm actually kind of curious to see that. I think him not playing there is fairly significant. Now, I could be wrong, and in the second half he may not play that much either. But that's kind of what I think. I also think that Tyson Campbell is one of those deals where, is he going to give up a big play on Saturday? At some point in time, he probably will. Do I want to take him out of the game when he does? I do not. I don't. I can live with that. I can give South Carolina a couple big plays and still be fine. And then the next time I roll around and see Georgia play a big opponent again, all of a sudden now I've got a 5-star freshman who Jeff has said is bigger than Richard Sherman, who runs like the wind, and he's got a little bit of experience under his belt. At that point in time, you better buckle up because at that point in time, Tyson Campbell's a big-time player for Georgia by the end of the season. I'm going to put him out there on Saturday. I'm not going to flip-flop that boundary and field corner stuff. South Carolina can do what it wants to do. The fact of the matter is Debo Samuel's a better player than Tyson Campbell right now, but Campbell can run with him step for step. At that point in time, we'll see what happens when the ball's in the air. But I'm not worried about him giving up a big play. I think he probably will. I don't think it costs Georgia the game, and Campbell will be better for it in the long run. K9 Blues says, will Demetrius Robertson get lion's share of the snaps at wide receiver this week? This is on YouTube, by the way. I think he'll be more of a big part of the offense. I do think that they had reason to save him a bit last week. I mean, maybe it is true that, Kirby, sort of chided him for not being, able to sort of sprint the entire way on the touchdown that he scored. I mean, maybe part of that's true, and maybe you're not quite in, full game shape by week 1. I don't know how quickly you can change that over the course of a couple of days. Maybe Robertson's also going to be in a little bit better shape too, maybe. J.W. Schwartz says, would Kirby line Demetrius Robertson up at running back? As Kirby kind of explained earlier, though, J.W., you may not have to. I mean, remember, that inside-outside combination, and we saw Georgia do this some last year when it would occasionally put 2 backs in the game, and Swift would be the outside guy, and maybe somebody else had the ability to kind of go up the middle. I mean, that is really hard to stop. And Fromm, this is one of the reasons why you got to have, Fromm in the game. Fromm is so good about reading that kind of stuff. Think about the touchdown that Sonny Michel scored in the running play in the Rose Bowl. That was a play sort of changed at the line by Jake Fromm. He's just really good at that. So if the inside is bottled up, then Fromm can take the outside, whether it be a jet sweep or a pass or something else. Fromm makes good, quick decisions. Now, you can point out certain moments in which Fromm doesn't make the best possible decision. For me, that's fine. I don't really care. I just need you to make a good decision every time. It's the absence of bad decisions that matters here more than the presence of the best possible decision. And I think that Fromm is really good at doing that for sure. Brian Kephart says, will Kirby Smart open up with an onside kick? They did that last year against South Carolina to start the game. I forgot about that. I think that had more to do with being the preseason or being, moved to number 1 in the playoff rankings. But Brian, that's a good point to bring back up here. I had forgotten about that. Fishing with Tiny Bass says, does DeAndre Baker shadow Debo Samuel? So I'm obviously not a former coach. I'm not a scout, but I actually don't think so. I really don't. I think that Samuel's going to line up on his side. I'm sorry. I think that Baker's going to line up on his side of the field. It'll probably be the short side, and I think that Campbell will line up on his side of the field, and I think that's just going to stay there. And if South Carolina wants to put Debo across from Tyson Campbell, my guess is Georgia will let him do it. But I may be wrong. I may be wrong about that. But I don't think it's going to be a shadow situation. I really don't. Because here's the other thing, too. Ultimately, and Kirby sort of foreshadowed this the other day he said that for Tyson Campbell, cornerback is one of the easiest positions for a freshman to play because right now they're playing a lot of man coverage. And I think on Saturday it's the same thing. Remember, the issue here is not so much does Samuel get open. The issue here is does Jake Bentley have time to throw? And Carolina wants to move a little fast. They want to keep it up tempo there. But Georgia may trust the speed of both Baker and his sort of ball hawking skills and Campbell's elite speed. They may trust that as a way of saying we're going to put a lot of pressure on Jake Bentley. I don't need you to cover the guy for 10 seconds. I need you to make it hard to throw initially to him to give, whether it be Jonathan Ledbetter or Walter Grant or DeAndre Walker, just give them a little bit of time to get off the snap. Because, listen, I told you before, I don't have great respect right now for the South Carolina defensive line. I'm not sure I have great respect for that South Carolina offensive line either. And that may be where this game comes down to. You may have a Georgia secondary that doesn't have to go all world all day long, but just provide a little bit of a break here for the front seven to kind of get in there in that backfield and wreak havoc on Jake Bentley. That's what I hope anyway. Terrell Sheck01 on YouTube says, you guys really think a freshman's going to stop Debo? LOL. No, if that's what you're hearing me say, that's not what I'm saying. I don't think Tyson Campbell's going to stop Debo Samuel. I just told you before, if they're matched up one-on-one, or really even if it's Brian Edwards, the other receiver who I've got respect for, the South Carolina receivers are going to make some play. There'll be a couple big catches in this game. I just don't think it's enough to win. It's a little bit like what I said about the Rose Bowl. Baker Mayfield was always going to get his. He was always going to put passing yards together. Mayfield was the Heisman Trophy winner. I'll put Samuel kind of in that same category. He's going to get some receiving yards because he's a big-time receiver. But it's what happens in addition to that. In the first half against Oklahoma, Georgia was in trouble not because of Baker Mayfield, but because of, what's his name, Rodney Anderson, the running back. Georgia was giving up passing yards and running yards. And against South Carolina, it's the same way. Debo Samuel can get 150 yards receiving. Georgia can win by 3 touchdowns as long as it's not giving up a whole bunch of receptions to other guys and not giving up a bunch of rushing yards. That's my opinion anyway. Jason Anderson on Facebook says it's all about adjusting. He also says that Debo Samuel can't win the game on his own. I think that's 100% true. Maurice Carter says, I think we'll see Kirby and Mel attack the offense in many different angles to keep Bentley guessing in the pocket. That's right. And then a final point here on this for me, too, which is, back during the spring, Will Muschamp talked a lot about how fast they wanted to play offensive. And then Saturday postgame, and I played this audio yesterday, he said something effective, well, we're going to go fast sometimes and we're not going to go fast other times. That's the other thing, too, here is if they try to go fast on Saturday against Georgia, that's what I think you, as a Dog fan, you hope for, because that's just going to put more and more pressure on the South Carolina defense. And ultimately, Muschamp, but just like Kirby, is a defensive-minded guy. He's not going to allow the offense, Brian McClendon, Dan Werner, he's not going to allow them to do something that puts his defense, his precious defense, in a tough spot. And the faster that South Carolina tries to play offensively, the tougher it's going to be for the Gamecocks defense. It's another fun subplot and storyline to all this as well. I love talking about this stuff with y'all. It's going to be a great week of kind of getting ready for it. I'll be right about some of this. I'll be wrong about others, and we'll just hash it all out. But the season's here. The real season's here now, right? I mean, this is not, Jeff called it a paycheck game. This is not Austin Peay where you learn nothing. You're going to learn something big time on Saturday, and I think it's going to be really, really fun to watch. So be back tomorrow at 10. We'll talk more about it. If you missed a portion of our regular broadcast today, we'll have our podcast up here in a moment. We'll also be on the radio at noon on 960 The Ref. And then back tomorrow again for a whole lot more talk about Georgia, South Carolina. What else would you talk about this time of year? We'll see you then. Thanks for being with us. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza.